Trade Organization, a catastrophe. But World Trade Organization makes it almost impossible for us to do good business. Simply put, we have not been treated fairly by the World Trade Organization. The WTO has been a disaster for this country. WTO's treated the United States very badly, and I hope they change their ways. They have been treating us very badly for many, many years, and that's why we were at a big disadvantage with the WTO. And we're not planning anything now, but if they don't treat us properly, we will be doing something.
We will be doing something. I actually asked the WTO Director General, Roberto Azevedo, what he thinks Mr. Trump actually means by those comments. Take a listen.
I can't tell, really. I suppose that often when I hear complaints on the part of the U.S. is about the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO, the disputes, winning or losing disputes. And the track record of the U.S. is one of the best track records that we have by any other WTO member. So I suppose it cannot be that. The U.S. has been complaining also that the rules of the WTO need to be improved and need to be reformed, updated. And I think they're not alone in that view. There are many others who also believe that the WTO rules and procedures actually could be improved. And, well, if that is the situation, I think others are willing, members are willing to have a conversation about that. The way the U.S. is being treated, the U.S. has been treated exactly the same way that every other WTO member has been treated. So I don't know how to answer that question other than with the elements I just offered you.
Okay, but you admit that there are several members that think that the WTO needs to be improved and that certain things could be updated. What would you say is your #1 priority right now in terms of making key improvements?
I think members have structured their desires in terms of improvement of the WTO, and it's entirely in their hands. I cannot improve the WTO myself or the Secretary. It's the members who have to negotiate on how they want to make changes. They have mentioned substantive things, so agreements and areas in the rules that are in a gray zone that they think needs to be more clarified. They have also talked about process, how to negotiate in a way that is more agile, more flexible, more nimble. And they also have talked a little bit about dispute settlement, how to make it faster, how to make it more effective. All those areas have been mentioned and others as well. And I think everything at this point in time is at the table. I think they have to sit down and decide what are the priorities here.
I mean, you mentioned the time it takes to get a settlement. Obviously, it can take up to several years, and that is a problem for a lot of countries. But one, I guess, country that a lot of countries end up complaining about is, of course, China. I know that the Obama administration rather brought several complaints against China. The key issue with China is that this is a country that floods the market with cheap goods, floods the global market with cheap goods, but also limits access to their own market. I mean, what do you think needs to be resolved in terms of China's role in all of this?
Look, there are rules that apply to both China and everybody else. The rules are the same. China doesn't benefit from, different rules in the organization, so everybody is bound by the same rules. China negotiated their accession to the WTO by making concessions. Other members also participating in these conversations. It was not a bilateral conversation. China negotiated with many WTO members, and the terms of the accession were agreed by everyone. Whether or not some members now believe that those terms need to be rebalanced or re-examined, that's for them to sit down then and have a conversation with China about that. And I think, China has always said that they're not averse to negotiations. They're ready to sit down and negotiate as long as, of course, the outcome is something that they perceive to be fair and balanced.
Okay, so here we are. You have a huge country like the United States, whereby, obviously, as I'm sure you know, Donald Trump, one of his key sort of focuses has been on keeping his campaign promises to appeal to his base. My question to you is, obviously, we got this report that Donald Trump might be considering, and I want to emphasize that word, might be considering trying to find a way to leave the WTO. What is your number one fear when it comes to that? I mean, do you think that's a real threat and a real concern? And also, what is the WTO? What relevance does the WTO have if the United States ends up no longer being a part of it?
Well, to begin with, I think it's important to say that in every single contact that I have had with U.S. officials, and I have had a lot of those, not one single time was it indicated or suggested that the United States is leaving the WTO or wants to leave the WTO. So that, for me, is mere speculation. I have not any indication that that would be the situation. If in any situation, speculative at best, the U.S. decides to leave or something like that, I think it would be a blow to the system, to the multilateral system, because the largest economy in the world is outside the system. But at the same time, it would be a blow to the U.S. as well. Both would leave. In a situation like that, you would have almost a law of the jungle. You know, anybody can do anything. And we know what happens in those situations. You have retaliation, you have a protectionism increasing significantly, reciprocal and mutual restrictive measures. And that is the worst case scenario for the global economy. We would see a significant slowdown of the economy, if not of contraction, and everybody loses in this scenario. There is no winner here.
Okay, so and listen, a lot of countries have said that. A lot of countries have said, you know, the idea of potential trade wars and trade skirmishes, there's no winner, and obviously it's hugely detrimental to the global economy. I do want to ask, though, about other ways in which a country like the United States, where you have a president that really feels as though job losses have resulted from global trade. Obviously, previous presidents, like, for example, George W. Bush, had come out and talked about temporary steel tariffs, for example, that the WTO ended up ruling to be illegal. But if there is a situation where a country feels as though their own industries are being decimated, like, for example, Donald Trump, that's the way he feels about the U.S. steel industry, because of global trade, what remedies are there that they can pursue, other than leaving the WTO or initiating trade wars?
There are plenty of remedies, plenty. There are subsidy measures, safeguard measures, anti-dumping measures, countervailing measures. There are negotiations themselves. You can renegotiate the terms of trade with other trading partners. There are a number of alternatives for situations like that. I think also that we should not be too simplistic and believe that every job that is lost in the market today is lost because of imports, or is lost because of immigrants or anything that comes from the outside. These losses are jobs because of new technologies, innovation, things that are happening within the borders, not coming from outside the borders. If we just look at the trade component and try to fix this with trade restrictive measures, people will be shooting themselves in the foot, and there will be no solution here.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that a lot of people have talked about, that it's not just about international trade. There are other factors when it comes to the decimation of the U.S. steel industry. Technology, obviously, is one thing that people have to take into account.
And a lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people are saying those things because they're true, because they actually exist. They're not making it up. Nobody is speculating or saying things. Yeah.
But I do want to say that Donald Trump is using the national security argument to justify steel tariffs, aluminium tariffs, and some countries are just, I mean, especially the EU, the EU as a whole body has come out and said, listen, this is nonsense, right? The idea of national security being used as a way to justify steel and aluminium tariffs is utter nonsense. What do you make of the US using that argument?
Well, the views are clearly different. The United States believes that this is a national security issue. They believe also that they can decide what is their national security, and nobody else can challenge that or question that. Other members believe that that's not quite true, that first and foremost, in this specific case, the steel and aluminum safeguards do not or pose a national security threat. And they also believe that a member does not have unlimited ability to decide what is its national security. Now, those views are in conflict with each other. We don't know what side is is right at this point in time. They have to have a conversation, see if they come to terms with that. And if they don't, some are already challenging each other in the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO. I would much rather prefer a conversation and a negotiated solution, though.
Do you know what? It's so interesting because that's such a difficult position for the WTO to be in, because at the end of the day, with dispute settlements, if you end up, for example, siding with the US, it looks as though any country can just sort of scream national security, and then, you know, that's how they end up winning a trade dispute. On the other hand, if you side with the EU, then the US will scream, you know, see, of course, the WTO doesn't have our back. We better leave. So it's such a difficult situation for the WTO to be in the middle of, especially when you have the President of the United States potentially, and I want to emphasize the word potentially, threatening to leave the body.
Oh, I have said that before. I think solving this kind of dispute in the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO is not the best way to go. Precisely because of the things you just said, there is basically no win scenario, no matter what the decision is, favoring one side or the other. That's why I believe that the best solution for these situations is negotiations, sit down, try to understand each other, try to find a solution, even if that takes a lot of effort, but it's effort well spent.
And finally, my last question to you, Mr. Azevedo, is, you know, obviously we've got a trade skirmish, or I guess some sort of, we're in the early stages, some would argue, of a global trade war in terms of the tit-for-tat measures we're seeing with the United States and various other places. What do you think the global economic impact of that is going to be?
It's difficult to tell because it depends on how widespread and how deep this supposed war would be. We made some estimates. For example, if all the tariffs in the world reverted to what they were before the trading system was created, the WTO and the GATT, we estimated that about 60% of global trade would disappear. And at about 2.4%, a 2.4% contraction of the global economy would occur. That's bigger than after the 2008 crisis, which was the biggest contraction in 80 years. So I think this is definitely a scenario we want to avoid.